Are you making mistakes in TTRPGs, whether it be from that home game of D&D that you've been running for the past 3 years, or a one-shot from a new system that you decided to try? Or maybe you know that you're actively making mistake when it comes to a story element that you brought into a game, and you just kind of feel alone about it because you don't hear anyone else talking about it. Well, that is what we are going to be talking about in today's episode of the RPG Goblin is making mistakes in TTRPGs. This is something that is very common for every single person who plays these games. And I brought on Curtis today to talk all about the mistakes that he has made in his games. And I even share mistakes that I have made in my own games, specifically from my first D&D campaign that I ever ran. This is a normal thing to happen, and I hope that listening to this episode, you feel less alone about making these mistakes and know to embrace them and learn from them. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome, everyone, to the RPG Goblin. I am your host, Willow, and I am the one who asks all the questions because I am just obsessed with this. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about making mistakes in TTRPGs, which is, it might sound a little weird, like, why are we talking about mistakes? But that's because I think it's extremely valuable for people to talk about the mistakes that they have made in their own games out loud so that other people can hear and not feel alone. And so in today's episode, we have brought back Curtis, which it's been a
Hello.
long time since you've been back, and I'm so excited to have you here.
I was so happy to be back. I this has been one that you and I have been kind of brewing on for a little while, and I'm so happy we get to record it, and I get to talk about the things that I have horrifically screwed up as a GM, and this will be great. It's kind of
It'll
like a
be a
therapy
great
session.
time.
I've got tissues. I'm ready to go.
Exactly. It'll just be therapy. Think about it that way. It'll be easier. But yes, we have Curtis. And if you'd like to give yourself an introduction and tell everyone what you do and where to find things that you do.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Curtis at Hibbertigibbet on most of the social medias. If you can't spell it, that's fine. It'll probably end up in the description somewhere. I am CEO and co-founder or co-player. I still haven't figured out the title for this for 5%Chance, which is a TTRPG actual play and live streaming sort of group. We help folks with their production stuff as well as doing a couple of our own long-running games that can be found on Twitch at 5%Chance, at Chance5 on Twitter, and I believe we are 5%Chance on Instagram and TikTok. So we have a bunch of folks on. I've gotten to work with a whole lot of fun people just producing games from a couple of different systems. And, because, I've got plenty of stories, but I also like helping other people tell their stories. So
Exactly, which I think is fantastic. So you should absolutely go check out Curtis, especially 5% Chance, because that's just an amazing thing.
we also have all of our backlog stuff on YouTube, which is a bit of we have all of our VODs. And so we just wrapped up a Cyberpunk Red playthrough with a bunch of fine folks. So if you want to catch up on that and watch a couple of folks learn how to play Cyberpunk together, go check it out on our YouTube.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And Cyberpunk Red, that is a very, very exciting system. That's one I keep hearing about where I'm like, I need to look into that more. But yeah, that's amazing. And so for this kind of first part, I would love to first dive into your history with TTRPGs and your experience with them so far. What kinds of games have you played? How long have you been playing? What percentage of that have you been GMing? Things like that, because I'm just curious, like where you are coming from as a TTRPG enthusiast.
So I am not the grayest beard of the table when it comes to RPGs. I started playing when I went to college, right around when 4th edition came out, which unfortunately was like 10 to 12 years ago. Yikes. I've been doing this a lot longer than I thought. But started out in 4th edition, dabbled around, played a little bit of 3.5, kicked around a little bit in, I think it was 1st edition Pathfinder back then, but just a little bit of staying in the D20 D&D sort of pile up. Played through some 4th edition. 5th edition came out, fell back into it. And then in the last probably 2 or 3 years have really branched out into a couple of other systems. Spire the City Must Fall, Misspent Youth, 10 Candles, the Cipher system, reaching out more outside of what you can do with a single D20 and what you could do with a bunch of other dice or no dice, depending on how you're feeling that day.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about Fate, we've talked about 10 Candles here on the show, and those as a cool, here's what D&D does well. What else can I do with this? And what else can I learn? What new things can I learn? And what mistakes can I make in those systems that I wouldn't get the chance to make in D&D?
Yeah, I think that is fantastic segue. But I think that is a fantastic thing. You know, there are so many opportunities, not just positive, that other systems have to offer. And I guess I should say this: mistakes don't have to be negative. Mistakes aren't necessarily negative because mistakes means that you are going to be learning. And I think that is the biggest thing when you are approaching to learn any system, is that you're going to make mistakes. You know, that's just going to be part of the learning process. And I'm curious. So, you know, you talked about dabbling around with a bunch of like the D20 systems, like within kind of that fantasy D&D style. What was your first non-D20 system that you tried?
I think my first non-D20 system was Fate, actually.
Oh, really?
Was playing Fate Core because my group had been playing D&D a lot. I first did my first GMing in 4th edition, and then we were going out to a hunting cabin, spending a long weekend and hanging out. I was like, hey, I want to teach you guys this new system. I want to play something that isn't D&D. Let's do something a little different. And so I brought all the stuff with me and, you know, trapped them in a cabin in the woods with no cell service, and we're gonna play this game, goddammit. And
you have no choice.
Well, you have a choice. The choice is either play this game or like, I think the World Cup was on, so it was like play this game or watch the World Cup. And so for some people, it wasn't. Some people were like, well, I guess I'll learn this game, and some people were like, oh, the World Cup's on, I'm gonna go watch that.
Amazing. So what was that experience like? Did you know, that was your first time playing Fate, I presume, and that was your first time running it as well? That's a pretty big combination.
Yeah. Luckily, that was with it was with a group of people that I had been playing D&D with before. So it was my usual gaming group. And I said, hey, I want to do something different. You know, it's amazing what you can do with a couple of D6s, some Sharpies, and some index cards.
It truly is.
And originally, I had intended, I was like, this is going to be like a horror-esque game because we're in a cabin in the woods. The nearest neighbor is probably a half mile down the road. And when it is dark outside, it is capital D dark. I was like, let's do a horror game. This will be great. And so I had this whole kind of idea set up. But part of with Fate is it's very cooperative and collaborative. Sort of, you're coming up with these characters together. You're coming up with these... they're all in the woods, and it's like, oh, we're shooting a commercial. Okay, that's not really what I intended, but great, there's camera equipment, we'll do this. And it very quickly swerved away from anything that I had planned. And it ended up not really being a horror game, which was overall turned out fine. It just wasn't what I intended. But that's also that was a game where I just kind of leaned into it. And let everybody sort of guide this adventure and keep finding ways to make it interesting. But I was not, the captain of the ship. I was not the only one making the decision.
Absolutely. I think that's a big learning curve with I shouldn't say non-D20 systems, but a lot of the more narrative systems where it's more collaborative. That is a different play style that a lot of people aren't necessarily used to right out the gate.
Right. And that particular instance was the first time after I had a campaign end on a sour note. Because one of the things that I like, it's not a novel. If I wanted total control over everything, I would write a book. Learning what people are doing and letting the players have agency and listening to what they want and what they're doing is super important. And that is a mistake that I like I want, cool, we're coming up, we're about to hit level 10, there's this big boss fight. My first GMing set, was my first time GMing was coming in on another player's world. My PC was pulled out of the world and sort of turned into the villain. And so I was like, great, here's what I want to do. Like, there was a whole thing about like making, instead of like an anti-magic field, like an anti-religion field. And like, no, we're no gods have power here. We're going to kick them all out. And it's just going to be people and magic. And teeing up for this massive endgame fight that in my head, I wanted my players to lose. I wanted the like Empire Strikes Back, like kind of a downer note for the end of this particular academic year. So we come back in the fall and we pick up where they're on the run in this kind of Mad Maxy wasteland.
That sounds
but
cool.
I was so focused on that end goal. I was so focused on being like, they're going to be on the run. There's going to be these monsters that, religion doesn't. They're monsters that magic doesn't touch, but religion works on. But they've been making this world, so there is no religious magic. I'm like, here's this end goal, and I'm driving for this end goal. And honestly, kind of ignoring what the players were trying to do. Like, you could try to stop this, but this clock is ticking. And I was so players had really good roles, players had really good ideas, and I didn't consider those ideas impacting my world in any way. I just wanted the bomb to go off. I had my ending, and to hell what everybody else was doing.
Oh no. Yeah.
And so after that game never came back for obvious reasons, because people were not exactly happy with how it ended. And I was like, hey, do we want to play this again? And a couple of the players sat me down. They're like, it felt like this. I felt super railroaded. And I didn't enjoy that because it felt like you wanted this ending and nothing we could do could change that.
Yeah. Oh, that's a rough one to
do. I was a, freshman, sophomore in college. And I was like, oh yeah, I know what the hell I'm doing. No, I don't. I still don't, but I know that now. And sort of to circle back on a point that you said, mistakes aren't necessarily bad. Mistakes themselves aren't bad. Because that's an opportunity to learn. I think there's a slight twist to that. Mistakes are bad if we do not learn from them. They are an opportunity to learn, and whether or not we grow from those moments is what makes them good or bad.
I can absolutely agree with that. Yeah, because, you can be making mistakes like in all your games, making the same mistakes of railroading or being super controlling over the players, stuff like that. And if you don't learn to grow from that and you don't grow away from that, then those mistakes are just mistakes, and that's a bad time for everyone.
Then it becomes a habit, right? It becomes a thing where you're not listening to the players, and it helps that I had players that I was comfortable in, that were comfortable enough with me, or they just they weren't. I don't want to say they didn't care about my feelings, but they weren't going to spare my feelings when I was like, hey, do you want to play again? They're like, I like playing D&D with you. This game was not fun for me.
I think it's super important, though. Being able to openly communicate with the entire group, no matter if it's a player or a GM, which I guess it can be more scary to try and talk to the person who's actually running the game. But that's the most important thing. You should need, if you are not having a good time and there's something wrong with the game that the GM especially can control or is controlling, then you need to talk to them.
100%. Because
nothing's going to happen if you don't talk to them. And I know confrontation can be terrifying, and it is, but
100%.
It usually ends up with better games, though, if you can actually talk. And then exactly, you can all learn from the mistake. You can learn from what you've done to improve the overall game and to improve future games together.
Yeah. And part of in the professional productions that we do at 5%, there are that is the number one thing that we break down in some of our contracting stuff is what is the chain of communication? Great. If two players have beef, those two players talk to each other first. And if nothing, it is their responsibility to talk to each other. And if they're not comfortable, they get the GM involved. If there's a problem with the player and the GM and they talk about it and either side isn't satisfied, then they get their producer involved. And so there's always like, hey, if you're worried about this being a confrontation, there's always somebody you can talk to that isn't directly in line with the problem, who can be a neutral third party or who can sort of mediate and facilitate that. It's a little, and that's not necessarily what you're going to get in a home game, but you still have that, hi, this when you, I feel because, it's the thing they teach us all the time in elementary school, but it works. Because even as an adult, even as someone in a like professional sales capacity, when you, I feel because is a great way to frame whatever's bothering you. And like 9 times out of 10, no one's going to notice the fact that you're using something that, you know, my guidance counselor taught me in 2nd grade about conflict, like expressing what I'm feeling. No one's going to recognize that. They're going to hear, hopefully, when you do this, I feel this because of this problem. How can we fix this? And opening that door to, let's make this a conversation instead of me just dumping on you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, do you have, I mean, you mentioned with the campaign that you wanted to end in that whole big ending, and that caused, you know, some communication stuff. But have you had any other mistakes that spawned from a lack of communication with the group?
Yes, actually. Both with the group and like within and my, it was a lot of times it's communicating expectations and communicating what's the intent. What are we here to do? And if it's like it's the same thing when I'm playing games with friends, I have people over, I have stuff like that, and it's like, hey, we're gonna play Blades in the Dark, we're gonna play Spire, we're gonna do whatever. Have a couple of drinks, but we're here to play a game, and if we get to the point where we're just here to drink and hang out, we'll put the game on hold and we'll drink and hang out. That is the expectation is we're here to play a game, right?
Yeah,
we've all cleared
absolutely.
our Thursday schedules. We're here to play. And so a couple years later, this was actually like 2 years ago, running, I had gotten the initial zine for Mothership, which is a horror, like we've distilled Alien, like taken the Alien movie franchise, distilled it down into what works, removed any copyrightable things because there is an Alien RPG. But we took the system and went, hey, here, go build your own sci-fi horror games wherever you want. And turning that, we went in and it was like, cool, let's play. And it got pushed back. And so by the time we actually sat down to play the game, everyone was a couple of drinks in. They all still wanted to play. And it took a hard left into there was no buy-in, unfortunately. There was no like it became much more of a comedy focused game. Like everyone was trying to make each other laugh and trying to have a good time, which sometimes works in a horror game as long if you can pull it back. But between that and the alcohol that everyone had been having, we spiraled hard off into this is now like it went from horror to farce in about 30 minutes. And
Oh no.
it was one where it's like, cool. And in hindsight, I should have been like, hey, I don't think this is the game for tonight. I like, again, yes, I had a vision of playing this horror game. And with D&D, you can kind of swing it a little more because you can modify anything to the system. Your success rate will vary drastically, but you can tweak things and you can make it horror. You can make it slapstick. You can make it do these things. When a game has an entire stress mechanic and bad things happen when you get more stressed and your party members are trying so hard, like I don't want to say they're not buying in. They're not
into it.
They're not into it. And that was a moment where I should have been like, cool, I don't think this is working. Let's play something else. Let's break out a card game. Let's just spend time together because I don't think this is working.
And that's a rough thing, because everyone, like you said, everyone wanted to play the game. But if it just isn't in the cards, if things happen to where it's going to lessen that experience, then sometimes you do just need to pull the trigger and be like, no, we just can't do that.
And that was a lesson in like not every game is going to be perfect. Not every game is going to be great.
Oh, absolutely.
But and that so like I had driven about an hour and a half to my buddy's house to play. And so I was like, "Hey, I'm just not feeling it. Like this isn't working." You know, I was hoping I packed stuff to crash there, and I was like, "You know what? I just want to go home. I just want to drive home. I'm really not like it screwed me up. Like I mentally was just like emotionally down on that.
Yeah.
And you will have
I
games that you will have games like that. Like it was one where like I'm driving home and I was like, maybe I'm not cut out for this GMing thing because this game was so far from my hopes, not even expectations, from what I hoped it would be.
Oh man. I'm just
like
getting this fully right now. That's just
like I almost hung up my
Oof.
dice. I was like, this isn't for me. And so I called my buddy Josh, who is in my Ash and Shade committee game that I've been running for 4 years now, which was like the start of 5%. And I called him on my way home. I was like, hey dude, I'm really not feeling like I'm good at this. And he like, we had a nice conversation. He's like, you do not have to do everything perfectly. But there is a reason that when a group of friends wanted to play, he said Curtis should run this game because Curtis is great at this. And that's sort of the reason that 5% started, was because it was a group of friends getting together and one person said, hey, let's record. And then it shifted into doing live streams. And so talking to Josh is like, you are good at this. There's a reason that I said Curtis should run this.
That's so sweet.
Like 100% was like the phone call that I needed, and building that trust in my players and my friends to do that was important. And then later, like I did talk to my friends about it. I was like, hey, I would like to run this again. I don't think it went as well as I hoped, but I also want to like come to the understanding of like, maybe I don't run games for this group because I'm not interested in the same things they are. I'm interested in like, AI horrifying AI takeover on a space station somewhere, and they're interested in like zero-G sports or playing they're playing the 40K RPG, the Warhammer 40K RPG is. That's entirely in that group's wheelhouse. I have no interest in it. I'll hang out in the room while they're playing, but I have no interest in really diving into that world just because the world's dark enough already. I don't need more grimdark on top of it. Sorry, guys.
I want my darkness coming from space. And
I would like my darkness coming from. I would like my darkness from inside, please. Like whole free range, GMO free internal darkness. Thank you very much. That's all I want.
Exactly. And I think that is a great lesson though to learn as a GM and even as a player. You know, there are going to be groups and there's going to be GMs that you just do not jive with. The things that you want aren't going to be the same things that they want, and vice versa, because, you know, not every single gaming group's going to work. And I think, you know, there's that fantasy and there's that thing where it's like, you know, I want to be able to play with anyone. And that's difficult to do, especially if you want to play certain types of games that do require that buy-in and that, you know, those players enjoying those games. And plus, you know, environment does play a factor in it as well.
Yeah, and that's where like that's where the session zero is the most important thing, because you go, hey, here's my elevator pitch. Here is my 5-sentence breakdown of the game I want to run. Are you interested? And people say yes, people say no, and that's fine. And not everybody has to play in every game, especially with like bigger friend groups. You can't get everybody around the table because of scheduling, because of like, honestly, scheduling is still the big, that's big enough. I'll say it twice. But not everyone's going to be interested in that game. Not everybody's going to be interested in whoever's running the game because things you don't like that person's GMing style. There's nothing wrong with disliking how somebody GMs.
Not at all.
Because honestly, comparing yourself to another GM is just going to make you sad. Like, don't do that.
Yeah, because you're going to be like, man, why don't I do that better? You know, like all of those things, which is why I think actual plays are fantastic. However, can be if you are starting to GM, can be very overwhelming to see what people do and like professional game masters, like Matt Mercer. Like if you
Mulligan.
start
Like,
yeah, if you start comparing yourself, that is going to take an incredible toll on you because you are not going to be able to
100%.
get out of that headspace of just being like, I could do this better, I could do this better, I could do this better. And you are never going to replicate another person's GM style. That's just not going to happen because everyone has their own unique ways of running games,
100%.
which is what makes it special.
And so the trick there, yes, watch actual plays. Support, especially smaller creators. Find smaller creators and watch their stuff because that's like,
they're fantastic.
That's where you'll get all kinds of stuff that isn't in this professionally produced. It will be more in line with the home game that you're running. You aren't going to have a team of people making custom miniatures for the Ravening War or the Crown of Candy. Like, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have giant maps that light up and have smoke effects unless that is something you are interested in. But absolutely watch that stuff and steal shit. Take parts of it and be like, hey, I love how Matt Mercer narrates combat. Or like, honestly, Liam O'Brien, I love his turns when, like, in Campaign 3 as Orem, because it's Battlemaster, it's kinetic, it's quick and concise, and it tells you exactly what he's doing. You get that 6-second picture, he rolls his dice, and he's out and out of the way. And I love that. And so when I'm running about, like, that's something that I take, and I go, how can I incorporate this into a thing that I enjoy? Some people might want more flourish. Some people might want less. You can't make everybody happy.
Nope.
All you can do is make something that you are happy with, and you will find people that enjoy that, and you'll build a group together.
Exactly.
So, like,
and those are more special,
Absolutely. Because those are the groups that, like, you build this relationship, you build this rapport, and you all play the same way. And you will find, especially if you're going to start producing actual plays, you'll start finding people that love the way you do things, and you'll build your little tiny community. But yeah, find the things from Brennan Lee Mulligan, from Matt Mercer, from Abria Iyengar. Honestly, one of my favorites, Eric Campbell. I've talked to him about him a lot on the show. He's my favorite for building, because he's a professional screenwriter. So he does a really good job of setting up the scene and giving descriptions that immediately resonate with me. And so I pull some of those descriptions and things that work for me and then bring them into my games, and how he describes characters, how they're, it's a little more like a screenplay than it would be like an actual play or even a theatrical play, but it's there and it works for me. So I will 100% steal all of those things, because if I try to be any of those people, I'm just going to be doing a shitty job. I'm going to be a shitty Matt Mercer. I'm going to be a shitty Brennan Lee Mulligan, and I'm not able to grow past them.
Exactly, because you aren't them. And that's a huge thing. And, I completely agree. Steal and take ideas and get inspired, but don't compare, because once you do start doing that, it's just going to be the thing that you can't get out of your head, and it's going to just kind of ruin the time that you should be having fun running these games for your players and, telling these stories. Instead of being able to enjoy that in the moment, you're not going to be able to stop thinking about ways that they could do it better.
Yeah.
It's rough.
And if your players as well, here's the other half of the Matt Mercer effect. Ooh. If your players are coming in with the expectations of a professional actual play, squash that and go, hey, I am not Matt. Oh, on Critical Role they do this. Are you any of the cast? Are you Marisha Ray? Are you on? I can't remember any of the cast, but do I look like Matt Mercer to you? Do I look like Brennan to you? No? Good, because I'm a different person and I run games in a different way. If you want that, go ahead and put in an application to be a guest. I'm sure they'd be happy to have you. Which is kind of a backhanded way to say that, but especially in pickup games or going to places where you have people coming into the hobby and that's their only exposure to it. You can in those instances be a little kinder, but hey, you don't have to describe things like Matt does. You can just describe them in your own way. You can describe things in your own. What's your voice?
Yeah.
And how do you want to play the game? What works for you?
Exactly. And I think a valid point as well is new GMs also coming in with the expectation of actual, like professional actual play players as well.
Yes.
People that are
Yes.
going to have those elaborate backstories and, play fully in these like character voices and stuff like that. That's not going to be the case
No.
most of
And
the time.
that's yeah, and honestly, for 90% of people that are playing this, or 90% of people who are listening or even out there playing games, they are not going to hit anywhere near that level of production or like because they don't need to. You're playing at home. And if that's what your group wants to do, if you want to come in costume or cosplay and, really fit that vibe, go for it. But that is a conversation that should happen with the gaming group and go, hey, is this like, hey, if I show up in my, like, I've got 19 pages of backstory and this, the guy 2 seats over from me barely has his character sheet together.
Mhm.
You're not going to get the same thing where everyone's committed to the same level every day.
Yeah, and
Or to
that's
every game.
rough because that's gonna cause mixed game experiences even from session to session, and it's gonna be incredibly difficult. So I guess like this whole thing, the mistake is expectations. You know, having the wrong expectations when coming into a group because you're not talking and you're just assuming it will be one way.
Yeah.
So make sure to communicate with your group, have that session 0, talk about what everyone wants for a story, for their characters. The GM even, trying to say what their expectations are and what they can do so that the players understand. Just make sure to just communicate because that's the only way that it's going to really work.
Yeah.
In any group, even if it's a group that you're familiar with, just make sure to always communicate.
Yeah. And it isn't your story, it is y'all's story.
Exactly.
It is I'll betray my country bumpkin roots here, like it's all of y'all. It's everybody putting in and contributing to this. And if you have, the protagonist, the anime protagonist with different color hair who's doing like the plot's all about me and they're not contributing to what other people are doing, that's a conversation of like, hey dude, you're a team. All of you, like, and I just want to make sure, are you just in this for you, or are you going to like resolve this problem and rejoin the group and be more cooperative, be less cooperative? But if you're trying to run that, and especially if you're running like an evil campaign or something where like there is a traitor baked into it, that you need to be twice as communicative, if not 3 times more, because you need to like make sure that it's still a good time.
Because I mean, those concepts are always so cool, when you see them in media and shows and stuff like that. And it's always going to be more difficult to do it when it's just a group of friends playing a game because there are so many moving parts. A complete person is playing that character that's against a bunch of other people who are playing characters. It's like, it's hard to control all of the elements because you can't. Because it's people, like the people are going to be controlling parts of the elements. You as the GM, you need to be able to control, how it's going to weave into the story and making sure that it is balanced and, people are getting what they want versus people are getting what they want from the game and, want that arc of, betraying or whatever.
Yeah.
But also make sure they get what they need, being cooperative and being able to work together and being able to play as a group versus one sides versus the other.
Right. And there's like, that's one of the things I as a GM have no interest in running is an entire evil campaign. That just does not ring for me as a GM, and I have no interest in running a game like that, or honestly really even playing. That's partly because I as a human avoid conflict. I try to resolve things quickly and like make everything go smoothly. But that's just because of like how I grew up. That's just like that's my trauma response, and we'll push that off to the side for now. But that's something that I know I have no interest in. I have no interest in there being like a running an entirely evil campaign, or someone is going to like screw over the rest of the party to get what's theirs and be selfish and like drive this conflict. But I've seen it work with groups that are down for it. I work with Mr. Kurtwise on TikTok, and he just ran a stream recently where he had like all the players knew one of them was a traitor, and it was like, kind of figure out who it might be and like be ready for the big twist at the end. And the players did my favorite thing ever. The player who was the traitor was like, okay, as a GM, either we're all traitors, or it's just me and I'm the only one. So he reached out to another player and was like, hey, are you the traitor? And they were like, no, I'm not the traitor. Are you the traitor? And he went, either she's pulling a fast one on me, or I am the only traitor. Hey, do you want to be a second traitor? And she said, absolutely. And so like the fight started.
That's amazing.
The fight started. The traitor revealed himself, got a surprise round, rolled initiative. It got to the second secret traitor's turn, and she turned on the party. And I got to watch Kurt, his brain implode, because he's just like, wait a second, I didn't think about this.
That is genius. Holy shit.
As somebody sitting in the producer chair, I was cackling because I know I saw the face and I was like, oh no, he's unprepared. He doesn't know how this fight's gonna go. All right, let's go. Because he like balanced it for one traitor and a demi-lich against four of them, and it turned into a 3-on-3, and it was suddenly very unfair. But everyone knowing about there would be a betrayal. Saw like everyone came in with that expectation. So the second one was like, oh, here's an interesting wrinkle. Also, Kurt definitely did not plan this. So we're just like, everyone just kind of rolled with it. And it helped that it was a one shot. No one was taking it super seriously, and they're there to play the game and have fun.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing. One shots are a great way to experiment with some ideas without having to fully commit to them and be like, yeah, this is the way that we're going to play a year-long campaign, that everyone might not actually enjoy.
Right. Yeah. It's a pilot. Thinking of it like a pilot episode, in TV or something like, or like a limited, or in, my theater background, it's like an open dress or like a staged reading, where you just have the actors sitting, reading the script. There's no blocking. There's no set. It's just, does this work as a story? Does this work as a game? Great. Cool. Now we're going to sink thousands of dollars into a set and lighting and audio and everything else and make it a show.
Exactly, which just works so much better. And definitely I plan when I start to do more long form games, because I personally haven't done a situation where I do a one shot or, small arc before a game to see if we like the idea, which I kind of regret doing, because I think that is a super fun way to introduce the game, introduce the characters, and I'll just get a feel of what the dynamic's going to be, all of that. And I now really want to do that for future games, because I feel like there would be problems that could be avoided in some games that I've personally run. Just having that initial one shot, just having that initial, pilot. Let's get an idea. Let's see if we like this.
and also, especially trying out a new system. That's such a good way to be like, especially if there's a pre-written module. Honestly, run something that someone else has written, so you can focus on the mechanics and how the game works before diving into, okay, now that I know how now that I know how health works in Cypher, I'm not thinking of HP as its own separate number. I'm thinking of it in terms of resources and how the players manage their resources. Awesome. How do I make interesting encounters based on what's kind of already built? I don't have to learn. There's a really good analogy here in my brain. Let me just get the words in the correct order. It's like a car, right? You can go buy a car and drive it, and that's totally fine. And you can do some amount of maintenance on your car, but that is infinitely easier than learning how a car works by building it.
Yes.
You can like learn how the car works, and then you're like, hey, I think I can take this and I could swap out the engine. I say that like it's the easiest thing to do on a car. But I can like, okay, I could do basic maintenance. I could change my tires, change my oil, refill my fluids, and like take care of stuff. All right, now I want to make some modifications to it. I can start building out. And eventually there are people that go hard in the paint for systems and are like, I can swap every single piece on my car and make it do whatever I need to do. Those people in D&D are actual wizards, and I don't understand them because there's so much like going on to any of like the D&D subreddits, and they're talking about like bounded accuracy and like statistical, like on average, this monster does 96 damage per round. So if I have it attacking 3 times, it gets a +4 to hit and is doing 3d8. And I'm like, cool, I have no idea how you got those numbers.
I hear math wizard, but
wild. Honestly, hurts my brain. Because that's not
it's super awesome that people can do that. That's just fascinating to me.
And steal that information, because when you're homebrewing a monster, there's all that info's in the Dungeon Master's Guide. All that information is in different places, and people who go hard for those systems will share that information. The RPG community is so good about sharing, and they're like, hey, if you want to make it, something that the player's going to have a real hard time hitting, here's how you do that statistically, and then it's on you to take those statistics and go, okay, does this compare it to other monsters? Oh, this thing always hits on its attack. Is it going, if I leave the rest of the stats alone, this will kill my players in 3 rounds. Okay, how do I tweak that? Do I make it easy to hit? Do I make it hard to hit, but it's a glass cannon and like all your damage is like, it's got 6 hit points, but it's an AC of 22. If you break
Basically
through the AC, there's a lot of moving parts in that, but you don't have to do the crunchy math if that doesn't interest you. Go out, find someone who's done the math, thank them for it, verify that it works, and then bring it on in, and then maybe share something back with them with something that's your particular voice or passion in the RPG kind of sphere. Because you don't have to do all of the work.
Yeah, and even how you might have interpreted something. I think that's super helpful as well. I think people who create things want people to take it and tell them what they have done. What information they got from it, their experience with it, maybe changes that they even did, because that's going to that's going to improve their work, and that's going to improve how, they're going to even approach future things. So I think that's fantastic. So we are going to be having a quick little intermission here, and we are going to have the first promo ever on the RPG Goblin for the amazing show called The Thorn Files, which is a Monster of the Week podcast, and I really hope that you consider checking them out because they are an absolutely amazing show, and let's hear what they have to say.
Hello, this is Annabelle Thorne, current head of Thorne Investigations, a paranormal investigations company set up in Edinburgh. I'm here to tell you today that monsters are real, and have been real for centuries, only they've been hiding. We don't understand why they're coming into the light now, but if you see anything, if you hear anything that makes you think you're in contact with one, tell us. We can help. I have a few agents in the field just now, Evangeline Lane Fox, Peter Anderson, Vera Bright, and for better or worse, my niece, Tabitha. Don't hesitate to tell us. If you do, you might not get another chance.
The Thorn Files podcast is a Monster of the Week actual play podcast coming out every other Friday starting on the 31st of March with the first 2 episodes. If you're a fan of horror, mysteries, or shenanigans, why don't you come give us a listen at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and pretty much everywhere else you can get podcasts. Be ready to be scared.
Future things. So I think that's fantastic. Though I do have a question.
Yes.
This kind of started with talking about running pre-written
yes.
Something that's pre-written for a game, especially something that you're unfamiliar with, like a new system, to lessen your load as a GM to make it easier for you. Do you have any situations where you've made the mistake of running something custom immediately with a new game that did not work?
Oh boy. Most of my games are homebrew. They may pull from like different facets of whatever is like in the published content, but most of my stuff is whipped up and homebrewed. Because I like the narrative flexibility of, hey, here's a couple of here are 3 factions in this world that you know about because this is the information that's in the book. You read it, great, you're informed, you know what the city guard, you know what these different organizations do. I'm looking at my pile of books and trying to remember which one went the most poorly. Oh, which one? Which one is
most?
Which one is the one that like has the best lesson in it? Oh man, because like if it's all homebrew and it's all made up off the top of like if it's all stuff I came up with, it lands so differently. Running. So I tried to do a thing. in 5th edition.
All right.
If your other books that I've stolen from Kobold's Guide to Magic, any of the Kobold Guide books are so good as a GM for references and just like they're just short essays, thought experiments. What happens when you do this? And one of the things was like, can you have a monotheistic D&D world? Can you have a capital G Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are all monotheistic and are just like there's one individual, one entity at the top who's in charge of everything. Can you make that work in 5th edition? The answer, not really. That was one that didn't go well because I was so wrapped up in the big picture and how this world sort of develops and grows from this monotheistic standpoint that I lost track of what my players were doing. And so one of my players was like, cool, I'm going to use Thornwhip, but it looks like a tentacle. And I was like, wait, what? Hold on. Where is this coming from? Because your god is the god of like merchants and trade and is the like you're all worshiping the same god. You have a different kind of facet to it, but it's all the prayers are still going to the same entity. And he was like, oh, did we not talk about like, and it like tonally it felt very different because I had a lycanthrope, I had a werewolf ranger. I had a guy who said that he worshipped the main deity, but secretly like worshipped the proto deity that came before it. I had an artificer who accidentally like nuked the first village they went to because they were under attack. And then I had 2 players that read what I had written and what I had come up with very boring low magic characters. And there was this huge tonal dissonance between these 3 players doing wild and fantastic things, and then this like church, like essentially the church's money guy who walks around and is like, hi, you owe us a tithe, and if you don't tithe me, I will break your knees in the name of our Lord. Which loved that character, loved all like the low gritty style stuff. And then I have these fantastic like true 5th edition magic users, and I was like, this did not go well. And that was like a tonal dissonance, and I was so worried about the way the world was shaping out that I didn't have a chance to sit down and like craft the characters a little more in that direction.
What are we gonna do? You know, what's the plan? We expect from the world? Yeah, all of that. Using
magic outside of like these like 7 cleric things is bad. That is heresy, and you will be put to death. And they were like, "Oh, cool, tentacle whip," and I'm like, "Oh, that's a problem. Why didn't I think about that before this happened?" Okay, we're gonna have to pivot. I also,
now you know. But now you know.
And that was another one. And that was one where like that's the same group of people that I was like, maybe this group of people, maybe I can't GM for this group of people because they are my friends and I love them all dearly, and they will push. They are great at pushing against whatever's in front of them, and so if I put out. Like it was also my first attempt at a true like sandbox like hex crawl game where they could just go wherever they want and do whatever they want, and that was a little different rather than having like plot hooks they can follow. And it was like I think I tried to do too many different things outside of my own wheelhouse.
And so it was
That
just
didn't always
like,
work.
everything was going crazy and you couldn't keep track of everything at the same time. And then like the players were doing their thing and the world was doing its thing.
I was cooking a 3-course meal, and I hadn't tested any of the recipes first, and I hadn't prepared enough of my ingredients in the right order. So it was like, because normally it's like, here's all of my stuff is prepped, and then I start cooking, and I know my timings. This one, I was just running around like things were burning, like my oven was off, like nothing was going correctly, and
And
the game itself suffered for it.
Yeah, I like that analogy because it's almost like, you are a chef, but then it feels like in that moment you have never cooked anything in your life.
It's
Because
all
there's
things
just
that you're
so
like,
much happening.
you're trying to read the instructions as you're cooking, which is not how you want to cook. The other one was when I tried to homebrew a Harry Potter campaign.
Ooh, exciting.
It was so bad. Oh god, it was so bad. And again, this was a tonal difference, right? This was, I had, because Harry Potter, like, apparition is like a 5th level teleport. How the hell do you balance that for low level play? Because one of the players had never played D&D before, and she wanted to play it if it was set in the Harry Potter world. And everyone else was like, okay, that's fine. This was before the obvious J.K. Rowling is a TERF and an overall terrible person. But we've said our piece. We'll move past that. The like, from the magic system in Harry Potter doesn't make a lot of sense because you've given essentially 20-year-olds the ability to travel anywhere. And so, okay, how do I balance that? I had 2 magic users in that party. I had 2 like true Harry Potter style wizards in that party. And I had a muggle and a like ranger, like a nature magic kind of guy. And it was a weird, again, tonally very different. This was before I started really doing session zeros. This was after I graduated. This was after I graduated college. So it was like a small group of friends and their partners wanted to play. And it was like, cool, I've got an Auror, I have a Reformed Death Eater, I have a Nature Wizard, and I have a Muggle who has a magical gun. I was like, great, what's the weirdest thing that could happen? And the Aurors were like, the Auror and the Reformed Death Eater, the Auror was basically her probation officer. They were like, oh, we could just apparate over here to do this thing. And the Muggle and the Ranger were like, no, I don't wanna. You can't make me. And I had to like, okay, like I don't want to get splinched. I'm like, that's a perfectly rational fear. But they were like, can I use magic can I apparate with somebody if they don't want to go? And I had to like, okay, how do I like tweak this? How do I tweak this spell to work differently? And that gets into like using magic on somebody without their consent and like consensual PvP, and was just like so much going on outside of just, I just want to play the game. And this was before Kids on Brooms was out, which is a much better way to do like a magical fantasy
fantastic.
school. Like Kids on Brooms all the way.
It's such a great game. I love it so much.
So
I've
good.
run it and
It's
played
so
it.
good.
I've run it once and played it once, and both times are so fun.
It's such a functional system. It doesn't it fits the Harry Potter magic way better than D&D does.
Yeah, 'cause it's like you can do whatever. Like there are rules. It just makes it harder. If you're wanting to do something insane, it just makes it harder.
Right.
Versus like having a strict spell list that you have to pick from, and then those being leveled spells, and then depending on what level your like all of those elements.
Because Harry Potter is not a Vancian magic system. Harry Potter is not, I say the words and make the gesture and the same spell comes out. It's not like a slot machine where I'm like, I would like a Diet Pepsi, please. Here's my like $2.75 or whatever it costs now. I would like that. Thank you. It's much more flexible. It's much more individually suited to the caster. And you could do so much more with it. My one time I ran it was at a bachelor party, and it was all food-based wizards.
I love that.
Oh, it was so dumb. It was the wildest thing I've ever done. They were fighting the cheese cult, like they were like cheese caves underneath the school. I had a chocolate wizard. I had a bread
That is
wizard,
fantastic.
like meats, like this whole thing. And it was just like great because the magic system doesn't say, here's how you do this. It's, you know, what are you good at? Great. There's your D20. Roll that. That's your spell. We'll figure out difficulty later. And flipping Harry Potter into 5th edition objectively doesn't work. Like you could fudge it all you want. But
Don't
there's
they have,
not
like Strixhaven that's like almost that?
it's kind of, except that it's Harry Potter by way of Magic the Gathering into 5th edition. Because Strixhaven was a Magic the Gathering set. Which I love. I love that integration. Like Theros, the Theros set that they did. What the hell is the book called that Wizards put out? But if you want Greek mythology, if you want those old school Greek myths, and my favorite version of a piety system, like your cleric doing certain deeds gets actual bonuses. I loved that. I love introducing that so your cleric like becomes stronger if they do things in their god's name and do things their god approves of. There's like there's a piety scale that's really cool.
Really fun.
But they start. I also like that because they're like, here's Magic the Gathering. We built this entire world Bible, and they go, if we just send this over to the guys who make monsters, can we make more product out of this? And from a corporate side, I hate it. But as a player, I'm like, okay, cool. Like they did that with Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. Like Wizards is really good about building a fun world and then giving you that information. Strixhaven was another one where they're like, here's 4 schools. Here's kind of how they fit together. Also, we spent all this money building all this lore out, but we can't use it in the set because of how Wizards changed how magic card sets are made. I could rant about this a whole lot. It's really annoying. Instead of having like beginning, middle, end at each of these locations, they just go, cool, here's a location, and all of the plot is in one like 256 card set. So you have to establish the setting, find out who the good and bad guys are, and tell a story in 250 cards. And it doesn't work. Stressful. It does not work. Because there's no setup, build up, payoff. It's all jumbled together, and you might, like when you're opening the packs to play the game, you might find out how the story ends in like the first 3 cards that you pull. Like when you're opening the pack, you have no idea who these people are. You have no idea what the stakes are. You just know that these 2 funny named people sealed this demon away in the catacombs beneath the school. Okay, great. I now no longer care about the story.
A very common thread with like,
honestly, like
I had that in my game. I did that in my week.
When is the last time the basements of these schools gets inspected? Someone needs to go in there and check these catacombs for like basilisks or cheese wizards or whatever. Like what was in your basement? Like trolls? There's so many bad things in these school basements and no one cleans them up.
They really need to, they need to put a little bit more money in their maintenance and just like get on that and make sure the school's actually, livable and there's no threats.
Honestly, I need
it really is an issue.
Honestly, I don't know if this is better suited for Monster of the Week or Kids on Brooms might not pan out for it, but Monster of the Week as like Magic School OSHA. Like that's what I need.
That would be that. I'm writing that down. That's fantastic.
Like and because that's the stuff where it's like, all right, we're professionals, we go into this magic school, and that'd be really fun for like each player comes up with a magic school and it's like, here's the problem, like this entire school is in the clouds. What kind of monster is gonna live in the cloud basement that you have? That's
so good. I like that a lot because that's in the last Kids on Brooms game that came up, we ended up fighting a basilisk. And one of the players was like, who let this thing in? Why is it in the school? Like, what is the issue here? And like, now that you mentioned that, there needs to be some maintenance, and that as a monster,
someone has to go through it.
So fun.
Yeah, at the beginning of the year, somebody has to come through and make sure that nothing got in over the summer, or like, do like a magical summer camp kind of thing. That'd be funny.
That's genius. I love that. I'm stealing that idea.
Go for it. Absolutely.
I love Monster of the Week so much. So I'm down to run anything in it. It's one of my favorites. But yes, okay. So Yeah, and I think a big thing that comes from this is looking for systems that do actually fit what you want from a game. Trying to twist and adjust D&D 5e into whatever you want can work. Like you said earlier, varying levels of success. But there are like so many games that are built for these specific ideas that will make your job easier as a GM and player of
Mhm.
actually, playing that type of game, playing out that type of story because that's what it's there to do.
Mhm.
A Monster of the Week game is there to play out a story about hunting monsters. It's
It
hard to
does what
run
it
like
says
a
on the tin. Like it is. This is what
exactly.
we're here to do.
It's so straightforward.
This is a heartburn pill. It stops your heartburn. That's all it does. I don't need
Yep.
it to do. I don't need it to do my taxes. I want it to do the thing and do that thing
Mhm.
really, really well. Uh,
Exactly. I adore it. And so like that, it just finding proper games and this can come from mistakes that you've made with like running the wrong type of game in a system that just doesn't work for it. Finding those right games makes a world of difference for you and can do your story actual justice
and it makes
because
it
you can
makes
play it.
it. Yeah, and it means it takes off so much of that extra work because
Mhm.
the you don't have to go into the book and spend 10-15 minutes trying to find a ruling.
Mhm.
um and that's something that like as on a small scale, one of the mistakes I make is bogging down the game with that.
Mhm.
If
Yeah.
somebody has a question and I can't, and they're like, hey, with the wording of this spell, what does this do? How does this shape things? How does this change whatever? Or can I do this?
Mhm.
Or, if like I as a GM forget something and I forget that my monster was in the AoE for damage, but so was a player,
Mhm.
we will miss things. We will all miss things. And part of
And that's okay.
it's totally okay. At that point, you ask the question of your players, hey, I forgot damage on this monster, and you also forgot to roll damage.
Mhm.
We can like offer that up to the player and be like, hey, monster takes damage, you take damage, or we both forget it and we move forward.
Mhm.
And that kind of goes into like, I had a particular fight on like the top of a mountain. The players were like two players decided to jump from one mountaintop to another. And the rest of the party decided to walk around. And because in discussing distances, I had said distances, but one of the players didn't understand the distance that I had. And because I didn't have a map, because I didn't have a visual reference available, it led to some confusion and some frustration and some hurt feelings. So went back, like that was on me for not describing the distance as well. So I was like, cool, we will let these couple of things happen.
Mhm.
We'll play out up to where we are. And when we come back next week, I'll have a battle map. It doesn't need to be this massive like architectural piece. I love playing on like a white erase battle map with
Mhm.
like bottle caps as enemies or candy. Like using candy as enemies is my favorite because when you kill them, you can eat them and it's great. But you like have markers, have ways to notate what is what. It doesn't have to be a 3-foot tall diorama. It can just be circles on a piece of paper.
Yeah, as long as
And
everyone knows what things stand for.
right. And they also have there's a couple of folks that make like squared out pieces of terrain that can just live in a folder, and it's like it's trees, it's tents, it's city, it's houses, and if you flip the house piece over, it's the inside of the house, and like you can just kind of find what works for you and your group of players, so that way you are able to, if you're the kind of person who wants that level of detail, go for it. Or you could just be like,
Yeah.
cool, this box here that's shaded red is, you know, this is the inn and this is the tavern across the street, and whatever works for your players.
Exactly.
Just
Because
to
some
and
people work better with visual aid.
some people
Just
cannot
theater is fine.
some people cannot handle visual distance without
Yeah,
a reference.
I'm someone, I cannot visualize things in my head.
Yes.
So I have a very, very tough time when it comes to especially theater of the mind combat that is more tactical in the way that you need the movement and you need to know, like, how tall is this? How wide is this? So that you can cast proper spells and actually make sure that they work, all those things. And
Right.
so that's actually been a huge thing for me and not necessarily a mistake. Well, no, I would say there's partial mistakes in it of that's been something that I've had a really hard time with as a GM is the describing visual things, describing combat in a way that makes sense visually, stuff like that. And I've done not great jobs before. Specifically, I had my players in my D&D game, they were breaking into a house to retrieve a book from this guy, and they were going to return it to the original owner, blah, blah, blah. And during that whole situation, they got into the final room, and I described that there was water coming in. And they thought that the water was a much bigger deal than it was, just because I didn't describe the water good enough. You know, so they started to obsess, how do we stop this water, all of that. And I'm like, hold on. Because it was like 10 minutes of them like obsessing over this water, and I was just completely overwhelmed in that moment. I'm like, why are you messing with the water? You can just leave. Why do you keep trying to plug the holes that are at like the top of this room? Until I like stop for a moment. I'm like, hold on, everyone, the water isn't a main threat at this moment.
It's not that much water. Like there.
Yeah, it's not.
And that's one of those things where you're like, okay, cool. Hey guys, like this is a super and asking that clarifying question because I
prefer my players and people that I'm playing with to ask more questions than just assume something I said. So ask questions, ask to clarify. I do that all the time, especially when it comes to theater of mind combat. I ask questions just to make sure. I'm like, I'm sorry, I just need to make sure I understand so that I'm on the same page as everyone else. Yeah. And I think that's so important. But that's a mistake I've made. And I've made quite a few things like that when it comes to describing things visually. And over time, I know I want to improve at it, but I don't try to overly force myself every single time. I need to describe this perfectly or else they're going to stress out. No, I keep things, there are elements that I keep open, but I'm trying, especially since I started my Monster of the Week game, I'm trying harder each time to make sure that I'm clear with my descriptions and that they understand while still keeping questions, because I think that's a part of collaborative games that I really enjoy is people can ask, is this thing around? And being able to answer that because you didn't fill in the whole scene.
The question, it's something from, I think, Acquisitions Incorporated, like the first true actual play, which people will contest. But in those games, especially when Patrick Rothfuss, who's one of my favorite fantasy authors, he was like, he'll always ask, like, how's the room lit? Because he's waiting for the GM to say, yeah, there's a chandelier hanging from the ceiling. And then his next question is there a rope? Because he built a character with the sole intent of cutting the rope and riding the rope up while dropping a chandelier on somebody's head. And that's the sort of like, yeah, the room is lit, like, give enough description but give your players opportunities to add things to the room. Because for me, if someone's like, hey, is there a table or something? If a fight breaks out, is there a table nearby? I go, sure, there's a whole bunch of tables and chairs around. And they go, great, I want to grab the biggest, sturdiest chair I can find. And then I'm like, great, do you want to grab the biggest, sturdiest one you can find or the one you can lift without a problem? And then they're like, ooh, interesting question. Yeah, I want the biggest, heavy one. I go, okay, roll to pick up the chair. Or like, I need a strength check for you. Okay, great, you've got the chair. Now you're going to deal more damage when you hit somebody with it. Like, ask the leading question. Ask the question that gets somebody thinking about the next step, and then start, and that's how you start building. Yes, and or no, but.
So cool.
And give them choices. Make them make choices that are significant, but they are still in control. as opposed to like push this button, you get $1 million and somebody dies. Like that's not a. Give them small scale choices. Like, hey, there's a small chair you could really whack somebody with, or do you want a big heavy one? Do you want to flip the table over and duck behind it? You know,
that's always my favorite thing.
Yeah.
Specifically in combats where there's a goal, like let's say you have to stop. Actually, I think this is. I'm remembering a thing that you shared in the Fate episode where it was they were like trying to stop a cult. So let's say, you're in this huge room. There's a cult that is actively doing a ritual right now. And then there's an actual monster, threat that's supposed to be, trying to keep everyone out and keep the cultists, continuing working. There are two things in that room. There is the active threat of a monster who's going to attack you. And then there's also the cultists that are doing this ritual. And making those choices, do we focus on the cultists and what they're doing? Do we focus on the monster and try and deal with that first? And then even the party splitting up and deciding to go in different directions. I'm going to take care of the monster, you take care of the cult. And giving those small choices of different options in combat that isn't just fighting a monster. Do you want to work towards completing a goal or trying to stop something or retrieving an item? I love it.
There should always be a timer. And this is something I love about Blades in the Dark is having a clock and multiple clocks. And that's something that, again, pulling from other games. And this doesn't work in a 5th edition setting, but I have an indicator and I can tell my players, hey, in 3 turns, something, and this is something where you kind of break the narrative of the game and you tell because I ran a combat last week, 2 weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, time is soup, there, where they had a 3-headed fire-breathing chicken, or I say fire-breathing, 3-headed metal chicken that was shooting out these different beams and different things like that. Loosely based on a Burning Man sculpture that one of my coworkers made. It was a whole thing. Don't ask DMs where they get their inspiration. But giving players the opportunity, because they were like, cool. One of my players was like, I want to use power word stun on this thing. And I was like, power word stun, how many hit points does it need? Is like 150, I think, to stun? And I went, well, the monster has more than that. But I was like, what are you shooting for? She goes, what are you aiming at when you cast this spell? She was like, oh, I want to, the head that just shot a lightning bolt at me. I'm like, I'm focusing on that head. I go, great. Okay, that would make sense if the head, it's because all 3 heads. I was like, that would make sense if all 3 heads had their own smaller health, hit point pools. Sure, let's do that. Great, you've stunned the middle head. Awesome. And then they were like, oh, well, and it was like, yeah, you couldn't, my other player was like, can I feeble mind this? And I was like, it's going to be real. Like, you can't with all 3 heads awake because you can't charm it if all 3 heads are functional. And so the party went from, we need to kill this thing to, we need to shut down the 3 heads. Like, the combat shifted on a dime. And I was like, great. Took the stat block, divvied up the health a little bit, and we just kind of rolled with that. Because again, the players are going to be responding to the players and not just there are times where you say no. There are absolutely times where where you say no, that did not work, but don't just end your sentence there.
Yeah. Give options.
Tell them no, but is the improv thing. Like, no, but when it kicks back, when this magic failed, you learn something about why. Right.
Yeah. Failing forward. Honestly, every single thing that happens in the game should always push the game forward, even if it's, you can't cast that spell, but there are other things you can do, or, you can use the spell in another way. I think that is the most important thing because it's very easy to come to a standstill. No, that doesn't work. And it's like, okay.
And the question's like, well, now I don't know. I tried this and it failed and I don't know. I think it's a mistake because I didn't learn anything from it. Sort of, again, circling back to way back when we started, a mistake is only bad if you don't learn from it. And having, okay, yeah, your spell failed. Why? because like, what did you learn from that failure? What insight do you gain in that failure to make it better, to make your next move smarter or stronger? One of the other things this chicken did was like the third head had a fire head and a lightning head, and the third one was basically a modified rod of absorption. So it would absorb a spell that it got hit with, but it only got to do that once. And so my players don't communicate a lot during combat. It's just something that when they're in combat, we're focused on the monster. We're not communicating back and forth. We're focused on killing the thing. And I was like, if I put this in here and my barbarian fighter has a magical hammer called Fulcrum that can cast like Shatter, Earthquake, and a couple of other spells. And he's like, cool, I'm going to put a 9th level Shatter directly in the center of this thing. Ooh. I was like, okay, cool. Failed to save. It was the whole time. And he goes, cool, I'm going to action surge and do it again. And I'm like, okay, no. Now it's going to burn its reaction because you're doing the same trick twice. Incorrect, sir. And he was like, what do you mean it did it twice? I'm like, you hit it. You already did doing the same thing twice. This thing is smart enough to it's not going to fall for the same thing twice. Absorb that 9th level Shatter, got some hit points back, and sort of juiced up its next attack. And that was something that I had to, partly in the description and partly above game, going, hey, this thing is charging up. Like the 2 heads are stunned, the 3rd head is still up. It's pulling energy from the other 2 heads into its central one. At initiative count 0, it's going to shoot. Oh. At initiative count 0, something bad will happen. You don't, and they're like, oh, can I find out what it is? I'm like, great, roll me an Arcana check. And like, give enough of a clue that something bad is going to happen. Telegraph the play. So the party has a chance to respond and feel wicked smart.
Yeah.
Because they were
exactly.
like,
yes.
And they were like, we don't know how damaged this thing is, but we can see the battery inside. We can see the demon in a box that's driving this this chicken. Everyone went, we're not going to do.
Are so important.
We're not going to. And they were like, is there anything we could do? I'm like, roll Arcana. I was like, you can break the head that's about to shoot, or you could probably grab the power source out of the inside. And one of my barbarian like sprinted towards this thing, grabbed the power supply, and just ripped it out. And like the super dramatic anime charge up, just like and just like dissipated. And he felt really good because he dodged the thing. That's my favorite part about, and that's my favorite part about like breath attacks and big heavy hitter moves. You don't feel as bad using, an adult dragon breath attack if you telegraph it. If you're like, hey, it's like you see him sort of, the recharge worked on their move, because like I roll recharge at initiative 20. I let the party know ahead of time, or at the end of I usually roll at the end of the dragon's turn, if it recharged or not. So, my adult red dragon is flying overhead, and you see like the scales start to glow with this amber, this ruddy hue. Its breath attack is back. That's a thing you have to be aware of now, as opposed to at the start of its turn, oops, it gets its breath attack again, and I breath attack the same targets twice in a row because they couldn't move.
Yeah, it just makes it more interesting. It really does.
And it feels less bad.
Yeah.
Like
you have an option.
The attack is coming. Another place that I steal stuff from, and like it doesn't always work. Stealing from video games. Steal from like Destiny has some of the best raids of any game, because that is a game like the raids in Destiny 1 and Destiny 2 are built for 6 people to do different things. A lot of it involves standing in particular places and doing things, but there's always stuff for people to do other than beat up the monster. Or in some cases, you can't beat up the monster. You're trying not to die until you can beat up the monster. And stealing those combat encounters and shaping them a little bit and making them a little more interesting makes the boss fights more fun for everybody, because there is always something for someone to do. And maybe there's an opportunity to put your big dumb bruiser, your fighter, your barbarian, your guys that don't do any of the magic stuff, they're trapped in the room with the magical device, and they have to communicate with their teammates how to turn it off.
Ooh,
The
that's
bomb
fun.
defusal guy's in the other room fighting for his life, and he has to talk the barbarian through how to defuse it.
I love it. No, it just encounters do not have to be just combat, and when you decide to go for combat, it can be just so much more. And I think that is something that is hard to always remember when you're building combat encounters, that you can have other options, you can have other things that you can do. And I've played in quite a few games where oh, it's just like this, it's this ogre and you have to like kill the ogre for no reason because it's like coming at you, and it's like, okay, fine, fine, but then all that we're doing in this combat is just trying to defeat the ogre.
Yeah.
And even in those situations, I think it's important to have other options to solve it. Being able to not aggressively solve it, being able to like be not become friends, but like solve it through maybe you try and offer food
You
or
pacify.
communicate.
You don't have to. There always should be an out, and listening to your players will help give you an out.
Exactly.
That's like my party made friends with a troll because they went off and the troll's living under a bridge and was trying to get his toll so you could cross. And they started talking to him about what he's doing, and he was like, and I was like, oh, no one's ever asked this troll what he's spending the money on because he lives under a bridge. And I was like, okay, what's a troll what does this troll care about? Well, he doesn't believe in money, kind of. He's like, give me your shinies because other people want the shinies, and I'm trying to use that to like build a business and like build a conservation area. And so like it like spun out into this whole thing with this troll. And one of the players was in like the Merchants Guild, and he sponsored this troll to go be an official like business owner and start like his own bit. Like, and like I was expecting them to like drive past or try to trick the troll or do whatever, and they got him a job, or like they made him a full business owner. And it like giving. That's always people joke about D&D like going completely off the rails. Listening to the players and actively listening to what they're saying and responding to what they're saying instead of just being like, okay, yeah, you said a bunch of things. He's not super convinced. Like,
yeah, because then where's there's nothing fulfilling about that.
Right. Let the players, especially in D&D, your players are agents of change in the world. Let them make change. Let them take your plans and change it. And that's something where again, pulling from other books, Stars Without Number, Worlds Without Number has a really interesting faction system where when time passes, you roll to see what the factions are doing. And so the world is there's bigger forces in the world that are pushing and pulling against each other, and they're constantly in conflict. And the parties are kind of carving out their own little niche in the world. And they might make a small village where like those factions don't go because it's too much trouble. Like if there's like, a couple criminal gangs, they don't come to, or in Blades of the Dark, you carve out your own territory and people don't come into your territory to cause problems because it's your turf. So giving agency, but also giving challenge, and not just being like, yeah, you get whatever you want because you're super powerful. Things take time. Things take effort. There's always a timer ticking in the background that the players should be aware of. It can be something like, hey, the next heist is in 2 weeks. What are you doing to prep? What are you doing in your downtime? Or the solstice is in 6 months and we need to be ready to fight whatever's coming through on the solstice. Like there should always be a timer. So then when you finish up that timer, then you have like your quote unquote beach episode. You have your like full downtime kind of filler arc, but it's important for the characters, unless, wild idea, your players just want to dungeon crawl. They don't want to have these conversations. They just want to kill monsters and fight stuff. In which case, Dungeon Crawl Classics or DCC, Dungeon World. There are plenty of games that are just about the dungeon crawl, like 3.5 aesthetic that doesn't get into the narrative RP. Those systems don't do it for me. Like there's fun stuff. They do really interesting things with the magic, but that doesn't the dungeon crawl is not why I play RPGs.
Mhm.
And so
Not
when you're
telling that
removing
story.
you're removing the dungeon from Dungeons and Dragons, and that doesn't work for everybody.
Which is, I think, a really valid thing to think about, especially when you're playing D&D as well, because if you're not doing that classic, Dungeons and Dragons, having those dungeon crawl moments and things like that, yeah, you can still play and it's still going to give you fulfilling stories and things like that, but it's not always using the system to its highest, what it's meant for and what it's built for.
Yeah.
Especially like in D&D specifically, like combat and resource management are big things. A lot of the abilities revolve around combat. And so if you have a game that doesn't have as much combat, you're not going to use those abilities, which is fine. That's just something everyone at the table needs to be okay with going into the game.
Yeah, and be prepared for. And that's also where, like, D&D is so reliant on your 5-foot grid squares. Like, the industry standard. They built that standard, and that's why everything is like 30 feet, 60 feet, 120 feet, 100, like, and, within those distances, and putting your fireball in the perfect place to catch all the most people, but not your friends. Like, D&D benefits from having that battle map set up because it originated as a dudes on a map war game, and those roots, that is part of the intrinsic DNA of the thing. And if that is not what your table wants, if that's not what your group wants, there are folks that go, hey, you have, like, that just condense it to ranges. You have like touch, short range, intermediate range, long range, and if you're within that range, so like long would be like anything above 60 feet. It counts as long range. Okay, so your fireball you throw your fireball 60 feet, has a 30-foot blast radius. It catches everything in this at medium range on that side of the room. And just like playing much more loosey-goosey with those ranges, that requires a little more trust both for the players and the GM, because it's real easy for the GM to be like, nah, he was a little outside the range, or the players are like, yeah, no, can I dodge that or whatever? That's a little more narratively flexible. But you can get away without having to be like, I move 30 feet and attack. It's like, I'm crossing the distance between these two different ranges.
Yeah, and that's where I think playing D&D without grids definitely causes... It's not bad, or like by any means, like playing without the grids and stuff. It's just, there's a different way that you have to approach everything, because those feet and your speed and stuff like that doesn't matter as much. And so you have to make sure, and again, that everyone knows what you're going into before you play the game. If you're going to be like, all right, we're playing this just theater of mind, say that before you start the game, so that everyone can be aware that maybe you don't want to, because stuff like speed, like monks, and there's even the mobile feat and stuff to give you more speed, that might not be as it's still going to be useful, but it might not come up as much, because if you're not playing with those grids and you're not playing with everything laid out like that, it's going to be harder to keep track of it and always remember it and be like, oh wait, I have extra movement, but what does that mean?
I can go 90 feet. How does that work if I'm using like range bands? Oh, my dwarf has 20 feet of movement. What does that mean when the band of movement range is 30 feet? How does that like, is it I have to move and then dash to move from one chunk to another? What if it's 25 feet? What if it's 15? What, like, how does that mess with the nitty? Like, if you're trying to zoom out and get this like 500-foot view of everything, how is that going to work when all the players have are the nitty gritty details?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's a way. I think, again, it comes down for every single thing in TTRPGs, though, is just communicate and make sure everyone's on the same page of what you want to do. Because I think anything can be successful if you just communicate and are open to making those mistakes and learning from them and growing and being like, okay, we can improve upon this idea.
And like the number of times where I'm like, cool, I'm gonna make a house rule in this moment because I want to keep the game going. Let's circle back at the end of, like, made a note, check this at the end of the session. when the session is over or before the next session, I will find the rule and go, hey, here's what the actual rule is.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to do from now on? Let's stick with the correct ruling, unless we get something narratively interesting out of, unless we get something interesting out of the modification.
Mm-hmm.
Like, personally, like making a check, like making a knowledge check or something like that. I believe is an action in 5th edition.
Yeah.
I make that usually a free action or a bonus action if somebody needs to like make a more in-depth test.
Mm-hmm.
Like with casters, with people that are trying to understand the threat. I'm like, cool, make the check. If like depending on how they roll, I can give them a baseline piece of information. If they want to spend their bonus action to get more information, or to ask a question, go for it. Which is something I like about monster. It's like a monster of the week thing.
Yeah.
You know, when you're pushing, like you can kind of like, hey, I want to know more. I will answer a question for you. Depending on how high your roll is, I can give you a certain amount of detail based on just what you know about these kinds of things.
Yeah, and you can ask more questions as well, depending on how high your roll is, which just expands upon all the options in that moment of what you can do. You know, do you ask the questions? Do you react off of what you've heard? Stuff like that.
Yeah, what do you know about this monster? Mm-hmm. What do you know about this threat, this organization that you're up against? How can you use that information that you know that you didn't know you know? How do you use that to make the situation different and possibly end the thing without it coming to a fight? Exactly,
which I think is just so interesting to think about and try and figure out in those moments. Mm-hmm. Though actually, there are some. There's a big question that I have for you, and I think the situation of like that first game that you ran with having that like kind of planned end fits within this, but I'm curious if you have any more situations that you had this happen where you made a really big story mistake, where you needed to change the story. There was a big mistake in the story that affected the players that you didn't plan for, and how you handle those types of situations. Have you had that happen much?
I've had it happen a couple of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There's been the things where like I had this story beat in my head. I think it'd be really cool, and like we're gonna push for this, and this is the ending that's gonna happen regardless of what my players want, which is not fair to them, as they weren't my players or my friends. They were characters in the fantasy novel I was writing in my head.
Mm-hmm.
What else has there been? I think the biggest one has honestly been in the last couple of years when I'm streaming games. I had built plot hooks around characters regarding like there's one of the characters was a warforged with the soul and residual memories of a prince, and coming to terms with who he was. And I had like we were about to go to this character's region, the kingdom that he was destined to inherit before he was executed and put in a warforged, and like accidentally ended up in a warforged body.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of stuff, and I'd been working with this player about it. And then he had to withdraw from the campaign because of work. Like his work schedule changed and he couldn't make it, and just withdrew from the campaign. Which like I felt for him, because I had put a lot of eggs in that proverbial basket and was like really like, here's your time to shine, which he was okay with. He just had a lot of questions and wasn't sure how it was going to really land.
Mm-hmm.
And then I looked and went, oh no, all my eggs were in this basket, and now he's no longer there. Like putting the onus on characters to be the movers and shakers, and then like that structural leg just disappeared. Mm-hmm. And I had to like really quickly make sure I was paying attention. Like I threw focus so hard on one character that everyone else kind of fell really far off to the sidelines, and trying to pull that back together and make it so that way everybody has a reason to care about what's happening. Yes, one character is going to take point because it's their hometown. It's their part of the world that they know and understand, so they can be the subject matter expert. But there should be a reason that all the other characters care as well. Besides, this is important to my friend. And sometimes that's all that it needs to be. Like, especially if you're playing a character who's kind of like, who's there for the adventure and wants to help their friend, that's totally fine. But there should be something in those areas for everybody to, like, so there was, like, they were going to interact with the character's father a little bit in town, in the neighborhood. Is this character going to accept his new identity, or this is who he is now, or is he going to go back and accept his place as a ruler? Is he going to work with the resistance that was trying to take down his father? Like, a lot of it was focused on what this character was going to decide to do to lead him. Was he going to just like be his own person and just leave his kingdom, the kingdom that was his to inherit, to just fight amongst itself and just get itself sorted? Or was he going to take an active stake in it? Is he going to do that reluctantly? Is he going to be pushed to that by his friends and what his friends have done? And then all of that just kind of disappeared. So I had to pivot the story really quickly. And I've had that, unfortunately, because this game's been running for the Ash and Shade Committee's been running for 4 years as of November, which is the longest I've ever had a campaign actually run.
That's amazing.
It's weekly. Keep a single day in your calendar. We meet on Wednesdays, and we have met on Wednesdays for about 2 years, and it just works. Everyone's built their schedules around it, and that's the only way to make things this kind of thing function.
Absolutely.
But the way that you, like, okay, pulling the story out a little more, and like, yes, the characters are still the focus, and I want my player characters to be invested and involved in the world that's shaking out. But how can I do that in a way that if I lose a character, or a character can't make it that week, or someone, there's nothing worse than, hey, here's a plot hook, like, we're about to meet this character's, long lost uncle who they thought was dead, and this, the uncle character has been working undercover, or has been part of this cult forever and finally escaped. And there might not, but if I'm missing the player who's related to that, can I make that character interesting enough? Do I switch it around so he's the person who's escaped from being brainwashed by the cult, and he just happens to be this character's uncle, instead of he's this character's uncle who just escaped from being brainwashed by a cult. It's switching the order of priority. And what do I focus on more? I'm less concerned that he's, my Dragonborn's uncle. I'm more concerned with the cult and what has been brainwashing him. And there just happens to be a familial relation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really interesting. And this is actually great to hear you talk about this, because that's a big thing. Because I think it was last year I started my first D&D campaign, and I did something very unfortunate in the way of putting my eggs in one basket of essentially the BBEG. I had a main conflict that I really, really wanted, primarily based off of one character, and the way that they wanted to approach their character, which was like the symbiote thing and all of that. I made all of these plans. I was super, super excited. And a week before the campaign started, he decided to switch his character. And it was fine, because I would prefer for him to play a character that he was excited for and that he wanted to play. However, I did not have the foresight to switch the story at that moment, because I didn't think, I'm like, I can still make it work. That was wishful thinking. As we started to play the game, and there wasn't anything as we were starting, it was still the group, getting together and starting, the game and getting used to each other, all that. So like at the beginning, I still didn't think much of it because I'm like, yeah, I can still make this work. And then we started to get further into the actual game. And the more and more we went, the more I realized I'm like, this story's not going to work. This is the only thing I had planned. Shit. And so halfway through, I want to say 20, maybe 30 sessions in, I'm like, I have to switch where the story's going to go. Because I already had ways that there were already ways that it was going that wasn't going to be the original plan. And so I'm like, and still at that point when there was that split, they were going this way and the plan was the other way. I was still thinking I could make it work. So that's probably the biggest mistake I've ever made, was holding on to that story when there was no reason to. And
when it was no longer serving that purpose.
Exactly. That is my biggest regret. And that's a mistake that I've learned a lot from now, is you shouldn't get married to an idea. You should not, the big bad guy or the story or all of that. I think those are important elements to have before you start playing, but you shouldn't be absolutely married to the way that it's going to pan out, similar to your situation of, you wanted it to, kind of end in an explosion and all of that.
I wanted this apocalypse, and like the players had like escaped and they were over where they wanted to be, and I was so it's a phrase in writing and art and everywhere. It's kill your darlings. Like, you will love this idea, it will be precious to you and whatever, and if it doesn't work for the project, you just like take it behind the woodshed, and that's the last you see of it until another project comes around and works.
Yep.
You
and
cannot.
It's painful.
It's so hard. It's so bad. I had a murder mystery. Another terrible time. I had a murder mystery set up on a boat. I was like, it's Murder on the Orient Express. They're on a boat. It'll be great. It's a team of adventurers trying to solve this problem. It has become infamous in my player group as the reason the party does not go on boats. Ships, boats, doesn't matter. They don't touch them, because this was like it was probably like 6 sessions of trying to figure out who murdered this person on this boat. To this day, they still aren't quite sure who did it. They're like, we're pretty sure it was this guy. We didn't find a lot of evidence, but also like there was just a lot of stuff. And at some point, everyone just wanted to get the hell off the boat. And I was like, great. We're just going to move past it. A couple of the NPCs have come back and been like, wow, that was a really weird time on the boat, wasn't it? Glad we're not there anymore. And they just like moved on. And it's like, it's kill your darlings. It's, yes, this is a brilliant idea. Yes, this would be really cool to implement. Does this work in the world that I've created? Does this work in the setting that my players are in? Does this work because my players are interested in it? You might have a really...
The players are so important. That's a huge thing you need to keep in mind. And even though I centered this around a player, that was a huge mistake, because there needs to be that balance between what the players and characters are going to want to do, what they're going to be interested in doing, but also having a story that can stand on its own without needing one of those players. And it's going to be that mix up of, one of the characters is going to get switched up. You need to have the flexibility to switch it.
Can the plot, can the villain stand, like, because one of the Matt Colville used to MCDM on his YouTube. He's Matt Colville. He does a lot of really good game design stuff. And he talks about the world at, like, if the players weren't there, what is my BBEG trying to do?
Yep.
Who would stop him normally? And how would he resolve those problems? So it's like, great, he wants to become a lich. Who's going to get in his way? Probably a couple of like people who are generally against necromancy, people who like, there might be a group of lich hunters that's like, that's all they do. And so cool. Find out what the BBEG would do if the players weren't around. and have that, like, having the villain kind of stand on his own, and then introducing the players with either the BBEG or the like the pieces around the BBEG. Maybe they meet the Lich Hunters because they're in town looking for a Lich. Maybe they are, or like they're interacting with the guards, and that's where you start getting rumors of like crypts being broken into, like books being stolen, and like the players start finding these clues along the way that lead them towards the BBEG, and then they get in the way, and they become the big obstacle that the villain didn't account for.
Yes, and that's another thing, that's a mistake that I definitely made, is I think that the plot idea that I had could have worked in the way of if I introduced it early. I didn't do that. And that's something that I still regret in general, of taking too long to introduce a major story element. Yeah. That's going to be like the big thing. And then like realizing after it was like some odd sessions, I'm like, this still hasn't come up. And there's other things that they're interested in, because this is, I guess, what they think is the main story. When I was just introducing it as player things, and I'm like, shit. And that's where mostly I had to make that switch, because I realized at that moment, I'm like, there's two plots.
Yeah.
And it's even two plots in the story. It's only one plot that they know of. The other one they haven't even been introduced to. I was still holding on to it. I'm like, I gotta let this go. And that was a really, really hard decision to make, because I'm like, I don't want to kill it. And I did that, and it has been so much easier to run those games and like understand the focus of where we're at. But it still hurts sometimes thinking of it. I'm like, oh man, that could have been so cool. But you know, I think that's a great way to, you know, introduce it early and have the world just be without the players. Because that's how I in Monster of the Week, when they do the countdowns, that's basically the whole idea. This is what's going to happen if no one's interfering. This is what's going to happen without the players. Yeah, exactly. These are the things that will happen if the hunters don't get involved. And so that kind of helps you understand the next step. You know, if the hunters are still getting introduced, what's the next thing that's going to happen, because they're not fully involved yet. You know, they're going to intercept at some point, and that kind of helps get a good idea of the story and, you know, the hunt that they're going to be on, just as it is, because it can stand alone. And then you add in the complication of the hunters, which I think is fantastic. And that's great advice. And I will be taking that to a much larger scale for sure.
Because your villains, and that's where, honestly, Worlds Without Number and Stars Without Number, I have never played either of those games. They are my favorite world building resources, because they handle Stars Without Number is how I've built every single sci-fi solar system I've ever played in, because you can roll a couple of dice and it tells you like, here's the solar system you're in. There's 6 planets, 3 of them are habitable. Here's information about these 3 planets and their moons, all randomly generated with what kind of society lives there, what kind of what are like imports, exports, like big world building pieces. That's like, okay, this moon is completely barren, but covered in high yield mineral deposits. Great. So people are going to settle there. They're going to mine the place out. So it's going to be a very inhospitable place where life support and your shelter is everything. What kind of person's going to come from there? Like very, like Dust Bowl, westward expansion in America kind of people, and that informs the characters that come from there and helps sort of flesh them out a little more and make them more believable. Absolutely. And having that level of like, because you don't need to know the dude's family tree leading back for generations unless that's the thing he is the most proud of. And maybe that's like, that's your mayor, your local civic leader is very proud because you can trace his family line back to the founding of the colony. And that's a main character thing for him, but everybody else doesn't care, but that only matters for him. And he's an important NPC. So he should have that in his back burner. But having the world existing before your players step into it. And then, but also still having like, hey, your character's from this desert region. You and I should sit down and talk about this desert region and build it out. So that way, when we go there, you are the subject matter expert. And you and I know enough about the region that if you say something and if you improvise something in the moment that works, that becomes canon. That becomes part of the story. That becomes part of the event.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives players agency in the world. It gives them a little more play and flexibility in it, in a way that isn't really heavily encouraged in most games that I play.
Mm-hmm.
Spire, and I know I've talked about this before, Spire the City Must Fall does the dumbest shit with its story, with its player powers, in the best way. Because sometimes you'll have players that they are always reacting to what your GM is saying. And if you drive, if you're a very narrative focused one where you're telling and describing scenes, sometimes it's hard for the players to know when to speak and when they want to get involved.
Yeah.
And sometimes as GMs, we get into the habit of that narrator, or we are God, what do you want to do instead of tell me what you're doing? Mm-hmm. Spire is a great game for breaking that habit. Because the baseline powers of the class. So essentially, TLDR, Spire is a city that's a mile high. You are all drow and dark elves that have been subjugated by snow elves or Aelfir. And you all live in the bottom 2/3 of the Spire, and you are really just in a real shitty spot. And so in an effort to try and make your lives better, you and your friends have joined the Ministry, which is essentially an insurgency inside the tower. You cannot tell any of your family members you're in this because they will sell you out to try and make their station better, or because you're a threat to them and their neighborhoods. This is the opposite arc of a D&D game, where instead of being oh, I'm becoming more powerful, I'm a lord now, I have this +3 Vorpal axe of ass kicking. It's I'm traumatized. I have weird mental tics because I've stared into the abyss and it blinked at me, and I've trapped my soul in a painting, and if that painting is destroyed, it will follow me everywhere. But there are things where there is the merchant class. At any point in the session, this player can look at me as the GM and go, what is that NPC? What is their heart's desire? And I just have to tell them. It's not make a check. It's I want to know that NPC's heart's desire right now. And I'm
that's so fantastic.
Okay, sure. It's this. And then they go, great, I have this piece of information. Tell you what, buddy. Hey, I noticed you're looking you want an ice cream? Tell you what, buddy. Come with me. You and I, we're going to get you an ice cream. Come with, and that's what that person wants the most in the world. And they might have to roll they might have to roll a check to draw the guard off of his post so the rest of the party can sneak in. But that's much easier because they know exactly what that person wants.
Yeah, they know how to draw them away. I think that's fantastic. Holy shit.
The Bound has one of my favorites. Because the Bound is basically the Rogue, the Batman style one. And if there is a conversation happening that they could feasibly be a part of, they could just say, I would like to be in this conversation, please. And they Batman their way into the room and just appear out of nowhere.
It's so fantastic.
They're just I'm part of this now. And there was my one player used this. There's another gift that he has called Nose for Trouble, where he goes, hey GM, right now, looking at the situation that's in front of me, what course of action will cause the most problem? Will be the most problem, the biggest pain in the ass right now. What's that going to be? And so this guy's sneaking into this this snow elf noble's house where he's training drow duelists to fight for his amusement and among the other nobles. It's a very dark game. It could get real twisty. But this guy snuck into his house, and I was okay, so these drow are fighting, and this guy's lounging in this in basically a big fancy chair, having another drow feed him grapes, full hedonism bot kind of nonsense. And he goes, cool, so what's the most problematic thing I could do? I was well, you could run over and kill this noble. And he goes, great, I want to use my nose for trouble. And like, as he's talking to one of his, like the duelists that he's just like instructing, I just want to appear behind him and like jam my axe into his neck. And I was like, all right, cool. I guess we're in a fight. Here we go. And it absolutely inspires a level of player interactivity and player creativity that I love, because
Cool.
it goes, hey, ask your GM what's going to be the biggest thing for them. Or like one of the classes is the knight, which is more about being really, really drunk and getting into fights. Their core ability is, I want to pick a fight with somebody. I want to win the fight, cause a distraction, or lose but look good doing it. I want one of those three. Who do I fight to make those things happen?
That's so good. Holy
And I have to be like, yeah, there's a big scary looking gnoll in the corner who seems kind of nice, but like if you fight him, he'll probably kick your ass, but it'll look like a good fight. And he's like, great, I want to go over and fight him. And like that's something where I've learned to keep my brain open and flexible. And like,
Yes.
again, the yes and no, but no, there's not really anybody here that you could like, oh, I want to win the fight. Well, you could beat up literally anybody here and win that fight. Or you want to lose but look good. If you punch the bartender, the rest of the bar is going to come gang up on you, and you're going to lose against everybody, but you're going to look good fighting off as many of them as you can, because that's a way more fair fight. And they're like, okay, yeah, I want to do that.
Oh, that's good. I like
it's so good. It's such a wild game, because it legitimately feels like they put 24 artists in the room and said, write your favorite thing, and we're going to put it in the book together and just see what happens.
Well, now this is going to make me actually go. Like, I've been meaning to check out Spire, and I mean, I think I have to now, just to see all these things.
Or I was going to say, or we just record a Spire specific podcast, and I will just ramble about it forever.
I am also incredibly down for that.
Oh, it's so good. I might, yeah. And it's really the lesson there is like, just playing other games will help you find weaknesses and find areas that you're like, oh, this is something I want to bring into my normal games. This is something I want to like, my players aren't using their inspiration. My players aren't using their inspiration as much, and I want to give out more of it. Okay, well, in the Star Trek Adventures game, there are two pools of like chips. There's momentum and threat. And momentum is essentially like a shared pool of like, you can spend momentum for rerolls. I'm like, hey, let's just, if you get extra inspiration for doing a whole bunch of stuff in character in a row, I don't want that to go to waste. So you can give it to another character, or you can keep it on standby. And if like enough people spend inspiration, sure, like you guys can make a change to the story, or like give yourself an advantage if you're willing to, again, on that resource management front. How do you make the twist? How do you give the players agency, but I force them to make an interesting choice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, God, I love these games, because there's just so many things that you can do with them. And I think that's a fantastic way to do like an inspiration thing. Because I mean, everyone forgets about inspiration. It's so easy. But if you make it something that almost becomes a game itself to earn and use, people are going to use it a lot more. Also, I think we are getting close to the end of the episode, unfortunately.
Yes, we've derailed from mistakes. We've derailed from mistakes entirely. I think.
Well, I mean, I think all of these things are mistakes that people may be even making themselves that they don't really know. It may be the mistakes in their world building that it takes until actually hearing other ways to build your world and stuff like that. They don't realize they're making those mistakes until they like just understand it. Same thing for me. I didn't realize I was actually making a mistake with continuing with my one story until I got to a moment where it's like, this doesn't even matter. It's those realization moments that I think are what is important. So even though it's not, I mean, we talked about quite a few mistakes, but just hearing those conversations and hearing ways that people take their games and interpret their games and things like that can help realize those mistakes for people. So I think it's fantastic, though.
Yeah. And Yeah, I think there's like the ending note, like just you making a sort of circling back to the very beginning. Making a mistake does not make you, as someone who it ties a lot of his, especially used to like growing up, tied a lot of his self-worth to success and feeling like I screwed up, therefore I am a less worthy person. Absolutely not true. People make mistakes. That is how we are not perfect. That is how we learn. That is how we grow. And if you have a bad game or you feel like a game didn't go well, talk to your players and go, hey, I feel like this session did not go well because of these things. Or like, hey, was last session good for you? Like, what did you think of the last session that we played? Get that feedback. Find places where your players want to give feedback. Do like stars and stars and wishes.
Yes, that I
like hit the high note.
Thing.
Hey, what was your favorite thing somebody did that session? And then what do you want to see more of? And write that down and continue to use that.
I've been recently doing it for my D&D game. I've done it for the entire time we've been playing Monster of the Week. It is my favorite thing, especially as a GM. I am hearing from my players right after we finished a session when they are like, riding that high, super excited, all of that. I am hearing what they enjoyed. And I am understanding their perspective of what they're having fun with. And then they get to also tell that to their fellow players. I know recently there was a session where everyone's like, man, I really enjoyed your role play. Like this session, like I feel like you're starting to get for one of the other players, I really enjoyed your role play. I feel like you're getting a really good grasp of the character. I love the direction you're going in, all of these things. So hearing those compliments is going to help you in the future as you continue to play this game, because you know what people are enjoying, and if you're enjoying it as well, then it's like, this is the direction I need to go.
Look at this positive reinforcement and positive feedback loop. Like that is,
it's fantastic.
It's so good. And yeah, it's like have that feedback, have that communication, because again, it is y'all's game. It is for y'all to sit down and play with and have fun. And if you're not having fun, you should look at why, because the last letter in TTRPG is game. Games are meant to be played and games are supposed to be fun. And if you aren't having fun, you need to examine the why. And it might be the group, it might be the game, it's just not for you right now. You might not be in a place to play right now, and that's okay. You don't have to be on all the time.
Yep. You just, I think it all stems back to communication. It really does. You need to make sure everyone's communicating with each other, because exactly, it's a game. You are sitting down to have fun with your friends. If someone's not having fun because of the space they're in mentally, because of the game, because of even the story direction, stuff like that, I think it's great to once in a while sit down and just talk as a group. How is everyone feeling about the game?
Yeah.
This is a point where as a GM, I think it's extra important to open those lines of communication, have those moments where it's like, let's just talk. You can, I think it's also being open to criticism for yourself. You need to be okay with that. And you need to also tell the players that it is okay to say that, because there's no way the game's going to improve without hearing those mistakes, without hearing those points of criticism. But also without hearing the points that everyone's enjoying. So it's not just bad things and mistakes and criticism and all of that. It's hearing, I really love what you're doing with the descriptions. I love the direction that you took this hunt because it was really unique. I love those decisions that you're bringing up. I love the direction of the whole story. All those things, even though like it's helping you find your own ground within the game. It's helping you create it to be something that everyone at that table is enjoying, because everyone's sharing their thoughts and everyone can improve together. It's not just on one person. So I think that's fantastic, and that's why I think making mistakes in TTRPGs is so very important as long as you communicate with them. You have to have that communication or else nothing's going to come from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's boy, that's an excellent way to wrap it up. You even use the title of the episode and everything. That's A+ work right there.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, yeah, I think that's actually a great point to wrap it up, though. It's make mistakes, have a great time, have fun. This is a game, and you should be having fun, and your players should be having fun, and just listen to each other. So yeah, I think that is the end of today's episode. I'm sure there are so many more things that we could talk about, and I think that's future. Those are future problems.
We will 100% derail on those and keep finding more things.
Exactly. But I want to thank you so much, Curtis, for coming on again. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and I can't wait to I shouldn't say potentially, to do a Spire episode, because I've been really interested in that game for a while.
It's on the books now. It's official. It's been recorded.
Yeah, it's written down. It's recorded. You have to do it. It's legally required.
Oh no, internet expectations, the worst.
But seriously, thank you so much for coming on and talking about mistakes and sharing your stories, because I think it's extremely valuable. And everyone who is listening, I hope that you found even a grain of something useful. I think hearing those stories helps put things in perspective, and I hope that you can think about your own games and ways that you can improve them, and maybe even just reflect on mistakes that you have made and be like, how can I learn from that? And yeah, I just hope that this episode helped. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you again, Curtis, for coming on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, and also one last thing, if you have questions, ask other GMs, ask other people, get more perspectives. If you want to find me on Twitter and be like, hey, I was doing this thing and I think I made a mistake, and just like tweet at me, go for it. I'll check it out and I'll respond back in hopefully a helpful way. Because if you listening is a whole part of it, and communication is key. But again, thank you as always for having me on to ramble on about role-playing games and how much fun they are, and just to have a lovely time here. It's been a blast as per usual.
Absolutely. It's amazing. So yes, thank you. And I'm so glad that you had a great time. And yeah, I think this is the end. So thank you everyone for listening. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the RPG Goblin. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to go leave us a review on wherever you listen to your podcast. Any support means the absolute world to me and helps keep this show going, because this is really my passion project and I love to do it, and I'd love to keep doing it so that I can show you even more games. And also make sure to follow the RPG Goblin on social media. All of the social medias and the handles are in the description below, along with Curtis's social media handle will be in the description below as well. I did my first promo swap with the Thorn Files podcast for today's episode, so I hope that you enjoyed hearing that promo, and please go check out their show. Danny is absolutely amazing, and I loved having him on for talking about bringing horror into campaigns. And if you really want to hear a really good Monster of the Week horror game, listen to the Thorn Files. It is so delightfully spooky. And the promo for the RPG Goblin is actually going to be going up in one of their episodes soon. So if you want to hear that, make sure to listen to the rest of the podcast so you can. If you enjoyed Curtis, please make sure to go check him out and his own show that he helps produce, 5% Chance, which, again, the name of that will be in the description and where you can find it, along with his normal account, I can never say it, Gibbet. That name will also be spelled out in the description below. And go make sure to follow 5% Chance and see him run some of these awesome games on that show. He is an awesome DM, and I love hearing all of his stories. So it's just an amazing time, and you will have an absolute blast. Now, the next episode of the RPG Goblin will be coming out, and I forget my planner each time. Okay, so the next episode of the RPG Goblin will be coming out August 25th, and will be about a game called Mouse Ritter, which is the perfect game if you want to be small and go on little tiny treasure hunting adventures. You basically play as mice going on treasure hunting adventures, and you have to bring back things to your mouse hole. And it is like the cutest freaking thing ever. And I bring on Philippa Mort as the guest, who is absolutely obsessed with this game. And I had such a blast interviewing her and getting to know everything about Mouse Ritter. So I can't wait for you to hear that, which again will be coming out August 25th. So make sure to keep your eyes and ears open for when that drops, and I'll see you next week.